It wasn't exactly clear to me what I was going to be talking about. The title was From Bernie Sanders to Joe Biden, DSA and the American Left. I hadn't quite understood how this fitted into the two previous ones, but I think I want to do what I was trying to do anyway, because I'm not sure that, I think it's unlikely that Jeff Mackler would have covered things that I would, well, some he would cover, but some he would not. So I wanted to just say a few things about how I understand the overall bourgeois politics in the US before getting on to the specifics of the elections of Trump and then Biden and where things are now. The general framework is certainly very familiar to everybody on this call, and that is that imperialism gives super profits that make it possible to corrupt the workers' movement. And the workers' movement in the US is very much corrupted by the super profits of imperialism and by the general affluence of the United States. And an expression of that is that there's no working class party in the US, not even a bourgeois workers' party. But I want to emphasize a couple of other things. First, there are three great historical crimes that the US is founded on, which I think is also familiar to you: the genocide of Native Americans, African slavery, and the theft of half of Mexico during the War of 1846 to 1848. And that very much shapes US politics today, as well as imperialism generally. There's very great inequality in the US, greater than in European countries. And that's based on certainly class, where there are more, there's more inequality in class terms than at any time since the 1920s. It's gotten worse continually since about 1980. That's a familiar story to you too, but also race, that the victims of the historical crimes, Native Americans, African Americans, and Mexican Americans, are very much discriminated against. With Blacks, any problem that exists for whites will be twice as bad for Blacks. And that continues down to the pandemic. And of course, there's also very great inequality on the basis of gender. There's misogyny, and that's been certainly aggravated by the polarization of the country that led to Donald Trump. The way the bourgeois politics works in the US, I think, is familiar to you. We have a two-party system, no working class parties, but two capitalist parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. They have to be understood as a system, and something you've probably heard, it's often used in the US, is to talk in terms of a hard cop and a soft cop team. The hard cop and the soft cop together try to soften up a suspect or a witness. And the hard cop threatens, and the soft cop cajoles. And basically, the Republicans are the hard cop in the US, and the Democrats are the soft cop. Malcolm X used a different analogy, saying that the Republicans are the fox, and the Republicans are the wolf, and the Democrats are the fox. The fox openly threatens, the fox tries to deceive you, the wolf threatens you. It's impossible to understand the US political system without understanding that they work together. The Democrats are definitely the lesser evil compared to the Republicans, but that doesn't matter because they're a team. It's not as if you could get Democrats without Republicans, or for that matter, Republicans without Democrats. Historically, the Democrats have been the party of enlightened capitalists, of workers, of Blacks and other people of color, of women, and the Republicans have been the party of conservative capitalists, the middle class, workers who wanted to be middle class. things have shifted, and the Democrats have shifted to picking up professionals, liberal professionals, and have lost a lot of the allegiance of white workers that they once had. And while the Republicans remain very much a party of conservative capitalists, they have lost middle-class professionals, liberal professionals, and they have picked up white workers who are disaffected, who feel neglected by the elites and disrespected. The two-party system works according to the logic of lesser evil. In any election, you vote for the lesser evil in order to avoid voting for a greater evil. And that's true if you're a Democrat. You vote Democratic, even if you don't like the Democratic Party candidate, because you don't want the Republican, or vice versa. If you're certainly a capitalist, but even if you're a white worker who doesn't want to vote for a Democrat because the Democrats are too concerned about Black people, women, which isn't true, but there are many white workers who think that. They vote for a Republican, even if they don't particularly like the Republican. And the two parties are so evenly matched and so much dominated by money and the media that this leads to an alteration. The Republicans get in, they disappoint their base, they lose the next election. The Democrats get in, they disappoint their base, they lose the next election. Now that fact, plus the system, the US system of separation of powers between the judiciary, the Congress, and the presidency, the executive, the federalism between state and local government, first past the post voting, all of that comes together to make a government that is paralyzed, that can do only what a consensus of the capitalist ruling class wants. And what they want is they want the military. So there's never any question. Democrats and Republicans all vote for military spending, $775 billion this year, not counting the black budget, the security budget, and paying for soldiers who've been hurt, and for interest on debts from past wars. So it's well over a trillion, 0.25 for military, and that's always passed. They also want a few other things. They want education, because they need some education in the working class, and they need professionals and managers. They want some infrastructure. They want roads and airports and ports and all of that, electrical grids. They want some minimal Social Security, including Medicare and Medicaid, which are medical programs here. And they wanted the pandemic rescue in 1920 and 21, and they got $4 trillion of rescue out of the Trump administration and $2 trillion more out of the Biden administration, which is an enormous figure. That also shows that the resources that the US ruling class has to try to pacify the working class. Now I want to shift to the 2016 and 2020 presidential elections. Well, you know this, but I just want to say it from my point of view. The first election in 2016 was Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton. Sanders went into that election trying to make some political points, but having no expectation of winning. And he found his great surprise that large numbers of workers and of youth turned out in support of him. So he got into, and it wasn't him, it was rather that they were open to New Deal reforms, which have not been part of the Democratic Party program for decades. New Deal reforms, but updated to the 21st century. They wanted those, and Sanders spoke those. Clinton did not. They gravitated to Sanders. Once he got into his head that he could actually win, then he campaigned much harder, but he also went after Hillary Clinton much more than he had before. And one of the conclusions that he drew from this was that his campaign was too aggressive and that he had contributed to Trump's victory, which in part shows how he changed in his plan in 2020. In Clinton versus Trump, there was again this two-party alternation. The Obama administration had been in for 8 years. It was time to shift, and by that alternation, the Democratic Party base was disaffected, indifferent, and didn't turn out in enough numbers. Then Trump, of course, alarmed everybody, did things that provoked the Democratic Party base. The Democrats won majority in 2010 in Congress, and because of that, were then able to block anything that Trump wanted to do. So what he did was mainly through administrative executive orders from that point on. In 2020, the first election was between Sanders and Biden. And again, Biden got quite a bit of support from workers and youth because he pushed New Deal politics. It had nothing to do with socialism. It was New Deal reforms. And but it was not the level of enthusiasm that there had been 4 years earlier. And that was because everybody knew where this was going to go. It's going to go to, or not everybody, but most everybody knew Biden is going to beat Sanders. Sanders is going to support Biden, and that'll be that. So there wasn't the excitement that there was the first time around. Basically, 1 month into the campaign, from March to April, Biden launched his counteroffensive, Sanders folded, and immediately set up the Biden-Sanders task forces with Biden to make sure that there was Democratic Party unity from then on. And all of the so-called squad, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others, supported this move. AOC was the head of the environmental joint task force or unity task force. In the Biden versus Trump election, there was a large vote for Biden in order to stop Trump. And on the part of Democrats, a panic, because they saw it as saving democracy. And by the time the election passed and Trump had been defeated and Biden had won, many on the left realized they had been swindled. They had bought into this vote for Biden to stop Trump. And having started out a year earlier thinking, oh, we might have Bernie Sanders, they now ended up with Joe Biden, who was more conservative than Barack Obama, and none of their hopes had been realized. The two-party system had worked brilliantly, as it usually does in this country, and they had been forced to vote for the lesser evil, which was indeed evil. Since then, as you know, and as Jonathan referred to, the Congress has been gridlocked. Biden was able to get another $2 trillion rather in pandemic bailout, but that was only half of what Trump had gotten. He was able to get $2 trillion over 10 years of infrastructure, and that was it. Then full stop, nothing more. And that gridlock is certainly going to get worse rather than better. It's very likely that the Republicans are going to win one or both houses of Congress this fall. And when that happens, then Congress is absolutely paralyzed. Probably, or at least this is my opinion, probably the Democrats will keep the presidency in 2024. I think they'll try to keep Biden there because it would be too messy to try to switch to somebody else, and they might lose, but he may be too frail to be able to run again in 2024. But they should have on their side, the pandemic will be behind, the economic recovery should be underway, the inflation should be down, the material conditions should be more favorable to them. That usually means that they can keep the presidency. So with Bill Clinton in 1996 and with Barack Obama in 2008, even though the Democrats had lost Congress, they managed to hold on to the presidency. So that I think is likely, but of course, what that means is continuing that only what the ruling class has a consensus for will be adopted. So yes to militarism and war, yes to confrontation with Russia, yes in a complicated way with confrontation with China, complicated because the capitalists have lots of investments there and don't want to risk those. But no to anything significant on the environment, no to anything about inequality, poverty, police, prisons, probably the overturning of Roe versus Wade and leaving it to states to make their decisions about abortion rights. All that's going to happen, probably. So the situation is not going to be good in the future. It is going to be a swindle. So the question is, how did the left get drawn into voting for this swindle, which is what most of the left did? And with this, I want to shift to DSA and the American left. Some of this, I'm sure you know, that DSA grew rapidly after Sanders was defeated and Trump won in 2016. There were sort of two waves. One when Sanders lost, and the second wave when Trump won, as young people felt the Democratic Party doesn't have answers for us. We need something else, and look to DSA to supply it. The growth of DSA showed, well, the Sanders campaign showed that workers and youth were interested in New Deal policies. DSA's growth showed that they were interested in socialism. For 80 years, the DSA and its predecessors have been the social democratic wing of the Democratic Party. With the influx of people in 2017 on, basically, there were new possibilities for DSA. Most of the people who came in were workers who had some college education. Some of them were grad students or research assistants. Some were adjunct professors without tenure and without regular jobs. Some were teachers, nurses, tech workers. There were also some restaurant workers and others, but they tended to be college-educated workers. They wanted a mass working class socialist party. They didn't want the Democratic Party. They had gotten beyond that at the point they joined DSA. They had a working class orientation, but they didn't know what to do with that. And in particular, on electoral orientation, DSA has been divided over what to do. There are many in DSA who in fact say no break with the Democrats. They thought when they joined DSA, we might be able to break, but they've now come to the conclusion that you have to win electoral office. The only way to win is as a Democrat, so run as a Democrat and try to make the best of it. A large minority of DSA, maybe as much as 40%, supports the notion of what they call a dirty break, that we want to break with the Democrats, but not now. So what we'll do now is to run socialists as Democrats and lay a groundwork for breaking with the Democrats. Now, this has been the policy of many in DSA for 80 years. So what ends up happening is there's no break. There is a smaller minority, perhaps 25% of DSA, that says break now, but they're in DSA in order to take more with them rather than just quitting as revolutionary socialists with a small group of hundreds or possibly 1,000. They're trying to take out tens of thousands if they can. Now, the other issue in DSA is the rank and file strategy, which is how to do an orientation to the working class. And for some in DSA, that means getting a union staff job or getting a rank and file job in a union. Some go as far as organizing militants in democracy, but the issue really is, are you going to go beyond that and fight the bureaucracy, which DSA has never done and is not prepared to now? The 2017 and 2019 conventions both showed leftward movement of DSA. I don't have time to go into that in detail, but I could talk about it if we want to in the discussion. The 2021 convention showed a rightward consolidation. Now, there are caucuses within DSA. There are some that have a leftish orientation. The largest is Bread and Roses, which supports the dirty break and rank and file strategy. I'd say half of the members of Solidarity who are in caucuses are in Bread and Roses. And anyway, it's the biggest that has any claim to being anti-capitalist socialist. Then there's Reform and Revolution, which is the former CWI or Socialist Party of Britain group in DSA. There's Socialist Alternative, which is mostly out of DSA, but partly in. There is Tempest, which I'm also a member of. Tempest, which functions as a caucus in DSA, but also a membership organization outside. These caucuses, I'd say Reform and Revolution, Socialist Alternative, Tempest, and the left wing of Bread and Roses want to begin a break with the Democrats now, fought for that in one way or another at the 2021 convention and lost. Now, a question that probably comrades are asking is, why in the heck would you participate in DSA, given its history of being the social democratic left of the Democratic Party and the fact that it is not breaking with the Democrats now? Well, there are two reasons for participating. One is local work, that in many places in the country, DSA organizes more people working on local issues like tenants unions or rank and file caucuses in unions or action around police than any other group other than spontaneous risings like the one around Black Lives Matter. The other is an entry, classical Trotskyist entry, build a revolutionary pole. And I think that for Reform and Revolution, although they won't admit it, that's their goal. Certainly for Socialist Alternative and Tempest, that's their goal, although they're afraid of using the word entry. Even Tempest is somewhat afraid of that. Solidarity and Tempest, two groups I'm part of, both say, join DSA if it makes sense in terms of your local work, otherwise don't. For me, I'm in Northern Michigan DSA. The number of people attending meetings has declined so much that the core people, including me, have decided we're not going to try to maintain a branch of DSA as such. We're going to maintain a socialist reading group and then see where things go. If there's a pickup in local activity and DSA seems relevant, maybe we'll revise it. But nationally, I think it still does make sense to have an entry into DSA, although recognizing that it is consolidating to the right and the window is closing, time is running out. Now, in response to questions, I can talk about revolutionary socialists outside DSA. There are some that are outside as organizations, but also participate in DSA. Solidarity, Tempest, Socialist Alternative, I've mentioned. There are others that do not participate in DSA, and I could run through those. None of them are as big as the ones that participate in DSA, if you're interested in learning more about the far left in the US. But I think that about runs out the time that I was allotted, so I think I'll stop with that, and then we can pursue whatever direction comrades want to in the discussion.